There is a cruelty the world keeps for the powerless, not the raised hand, not the slammed door. It is the moment a small, frightened person stands in a crowded room, and every soul of consequence agrees to look away. Verity Danforth had been hired to be invisible, to nod and obey and vanish into the wallpaper. One word out of turn would see her dismissed without a character. Instead, she stepped between the Duke and the child he was frightening, and said the words that would ruin her. Raise your voice to her again, your grace, and you will lose the hand. The hired chaise had given up its last pretense of comfort, somewhere past the toll gate at Harlow Cross, and now it merely rattled, flinging Verity Danforth about the cracked leather seat, as the wheels found every rut in the Northumberland road. Fog had come down with the dusk. It lay across the moor in long gray shrouds, swallowing the dry stone walls, softening the black shapes of the fells, until the whole world seemed to end a few yards past the window glass. Somewhere out in that grayness, sheep called to one another and went unanswered. Verity sat very straight, as she had trained herself, her hands folded in her lap. The gloves that covered them were kid leather, good once, mended now at 3 of the fingertips, with stitches so small and careful that a person had to know to look for them. She had learned to make a great many things last longer than they were meant to. A pair of gloves, a pair of boots, a name. She was 26, though the woman who had interviewed her in a cold parlor in York had guessed her older, and Verity had not corrected her. There was advantage in being thought plain and past hope. Plain women were trusted with children. Hopeful ones were watched. In her reticule was the letter that had brought her here, a single sheet in a hard, impatient hand, signed by a Mrs. Verrill, housekeeper of Blackfell Hall. The terms were poor. £20 a year, a room above the nursery, 1 half-day each month. There had been a final line she had read a dozen times on the journey north. The child is difficult, and his grace is not to be troubled with her. You will manage her yourself, or you will not remain. Beneath it, almost as an afterthought, the housekeeper had noted that the last governess had stayed 11 days. 11 days. The one before her had lasted a fortnight. Verity had made her own quiet inquiries, as any sensible woman does, before burying herself among strangers, and what she had gathered in the coaching inns had not been comforting. They said Blackfell had burned, some years past, and a duchess had died in it. They said the Duke had come out of that fire changed, that he wore a black glove upon one hand, winter and summer, and never removed it, that he did not smile and did not receive, and did not, by any account, love the small daughter the fire had left him. A grim house, an innkeeper's wife had told her, dropping her voice as though her own kitchen walls might carry it north. A grim house, and a grimmer master, and that poor mite rattling round inside it like a pea in a drum. Verity had thanked the woman for the ale and said nothing. She had a great deal of practice at saying nothing. She did not fear the Duke. She had decided this somewhere around Durham, the way she decided most things, once and for all. A frightening man was only a man who had discovered that frightening people was cheaper than persuading them. She had known several. What she feared, if she feared anything, was the phrase, "You will manage her yourself." She knew the sound a house made when it had quietly agreed a child was a nuisance. She had, a long time ago, been that child. The memory came as it always came, uninvited and complete. She was 10 years old, standing in the assembly room of a market town whose name she no longer permitted herself to say aloud. Her father, a surgeon of real skill and no fortune, had lost a patient. Not a common patient, the only son of the family that owned half the valley and most of the goodwill in it. The boy was past saving before her father crossed the threshold, and her father said so, because honesty was the one extravagance he ever allowed himself. For that honesty, the family broke him. A word here, a whisper there, an account left conveniently unpaid to make him look a cheat. By the following winter, he was dead of a fever, he was too tired and too disgraced to fight. And Verity had stood in that bright, crowded assembly room in her good gray dress, while the whole town found somewhere else to look. Not one of them cruel. That was the part she had never been able to forget. Not one of them cruel, and every last one of them silent, studying their gloves and dance programs and the toes of their shoes, until a girl of 10 understood that a room full of perfectly decent people will let a child stand alone if standing beside her should cost them anything at all. She had made herself a promise in that room. It was not complicated, and she had kept it in every household since. She would not look away. Whatever it cost her, and it had already cost her 3 good positions, she would never be one of the people who studied their shoes. The chaise lurched, slowed, and came to a halt. Verity wiped the fog of her own breath from the glass and looked out, expecting a dark and shuttered pile. Blackfell Hall was on fire with light. Every window blazed. A long line of carriages stood along the drive, their lamps smearing gold through the mist, and from beyond the doors came the thin, bright sound of an orchestra tuning its strings. Whatever she had been summoned to, it was not a quiet house on a quiet night. No one had told her there was to be a ball. The great doors stood open, spilling heat and candlelight, and the scent of hothouse flowers into the cold, and no one came to meet her. Verity climbed down, paid the coachman the last of her journey coin, and watched the chaise vanish into the fog like a closing door. She took up her single trunk by its rope handle and carried it to the foot of the steps. A footman found her there, young and harried, in livery a size too large. He took in her plain gray dress, her mended gloves, the trunk in her hand, and reached the obvious conclusion. Deliveries and servants to the east door, he said, already turning away. I am neither, Verity said. I am the new governess, and I am expected. Perhaps not tonight, but expected. She did not raise her voice. She had found that lowering it worked far better. Something in the evenness of it stopped him. He weighed which mistake would cost him the more, muttered at her to wait, and darted inside. Verity waited, cold water finding its way past her collar, and did not shift her feet. Stillness, she had learned, is mistaken for confidence, and confidence convincingly counterfeited is nearly as useful as the real thing. The man who came was not the footman. He was tall and spare and old, dressed in a black so correct it might have been carved onto him, with the gray, sleepless face of a man who has held a foundering house together far too long. This was Mr. Redverse, butler at Blackfell since before the fire. He regarded her a while without expression. Miss Danforth, he said. It was not a question. You have chosen a remarkable evening upon which to arrive. I chose the evening your letter chose for me. If it is inconvenient, the inconvenience is not of my making. The faintest movement touched one corner of his mouth and was gone. He stepped back and let her in. The hall beyond was a river of people, silk and satin, and the cold flash of jewels, powdered shoulders and bright, hard laughter. And above it, a staircase sweeping up into shadow. Through doors thrown wide she could see the ballroom, its floor gleaming, its chandeliers burning more candles than her father's house had burned in a year. She stood in her wet gray wool at the edge of all that light, like a moth blown in from the dark, and no one looked at her at all. A woman descended upon them before she had got her bearings, of middle years and iron carriage, handsome the way a blade is handsome, gowned in deep plum and diamonds. Mrs. Verrill hurried at her heel with a ring of keys and an anxious face. But it was the woman in plum who halted before Verity and looked her over from bonnet to hem in one unhurried sweep, the way one prices a horse. "So, you are the new one, Lady Hester Vane. Should you require a name? Whatever I tell you beneath this roof carries the weight of His Grace himself, for he has neither the time nor the temper to run his own house." Her voice was pleasant. Her eyes were not. "You come cheap and recommended as sensible, and I shall tell you plainly what sense means here. The child is to be brought down." Verity said nothing. A silence held a beat too long will make a certain kind of person go on talking, and reveal far more than they meant to. Lady Hester went on. "There are persons here tonight worth this family's while to please, and they wish to see the Duke's daughter. A duke with a motherless girl is an object of tender sympathy, and sympathy is a currency I mean to spend before the night is out. The child has been made willful by fools who indulged her grieving. You will go up, make her fit to be seen, and bring her down within the hour. Do it well, and we shall get on. Do it ill, and you will not trouble us past morning." She was gone before Verity could have answered. Mrs. Verrall lingered, her keys jangling, and for the space of a breath, something almost human crossed her tired face. "Third door past the nursery landing," she said, very low. "And Miss Danforth, whatever you have heard of this house, the child has heard worse, and most of it about herself." Then she hurried away after her mistress. Verity took up her trunk and climbed the staircase into the shadow at the top, away from the light and the music, toward a child she had not yet met, and had already, without quite deciding to, resolved to stand beside. At the third door, past the nursery landing, she heard it, very small and muffled behind the wood, the sound of someone working very hard not to cry. The third door opened on a room far too large for one small child. Cosima Vine sat on the floor beside a cold hearth, knees drawn up, a small wooden bird held in both hands. She was 7, dressed in white muslin chosen to make her resemble a portrait, and she had been weeping in the soundless way of a child who has learned that noise brings no comfort, and sometimes worse. When the door opened, she went utterly still, the way a hare goes still in long grass. Verity did not rush at her. She set down her trunk, crossed the room, and lowered herself to the floor a little distance away, arranging her damp skirts as though the floor were the most natural place to sit. "That is a very fine bird," she said. "Did someone carve it for you?" The child's fingers tightened. "Mama," she whispered. "Then it is the most valuable thing in this house," Verity said. "More than everything downstairs put together. And I will not let anyone take it from you." She said it as a fact, and not a kindness, because children can hear the difference, and they trust a fact far more. Cosima studied her with the terrible weighing look grief teaches children too young. "They want me to go down. I know. I cannot stop them wanting it. But I can walk down beside you and stand where you can see me the whole time, and if it becomes unbearable, you have only to find my face, and I will get you out of that room, whatever it costs me. Do you believe me?" The child said nothing at first. Then she nodded, once, and put her cold hand into Verity's, and the two of them went down together toward the light and the music. The ballroom was worse than she had imagined. The heat, the crush of silk and smoke, faces turning as Lady Hester steered them through with a hand like a clamp on her shoulder. Near the great fireplace, the most important guests had been gathered to receive their promised treat. A little apart stood the Duke. He was younger than she had supposed, tall and dark, his face one that might have been handsome before grief planed it smooth, and on his right hand, amid all that blaze of jewels and bare arms, he wore a single black glove. He did not wish to be there. She saw as much, and understood, that whatever cruelty lived in this house had not begun with him. Lady Hester presented the child to a cold-faced woman in silver and the stout gentleman beside her. "Here she is. Make your curtsy, Cosima. Show Miss Ainsley how prettily you have been taught." The child did not move. Her small hand tightened, and Verity felt the tremor travel up through it. But the woman in silver had already arched a brow, and a titter began nearby. That low, dreadful sound a crowd makes once it has decided to be amused. "Curtsy," Hester said again, sharper. And Cosima, 7 years old and drowning, did the only thing left a cornered child. She shook her head, pressed the little bird hard to her chest, and in a voice thin with terror said, "I want Mama." The word dropped into the bright room like a stone into still water. What came next came fast. Lady Hester reached for the bird, hissing that the child should put the foolish thing away. Cosima cried out and twisted from her, and the Duke, set upon from every side by the pity and the tittering and the one word he could not bear to hear aloud, crossed the space in 2 long strides and stood over her, one hand flung up as if to ward off the whole unbearable room, and his voice when it came was cracked raw with something that was not truly anger. "Enough," he said, too loud. "Stand up. You will stand up and do as you are bid." The child shrank from the sound of him, and Verity stopped thinking. She stepped between the Duke and the girl and put the child behind her, and looked up into the face of a man who could have her cast into the winter dark with a word, and she said it, quietly, clearly, into a room gone silent enough to hear a candle gutter. "Raise your voice to her again, your grace, and you will lose the hand." The ballroom froze. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. A governess, wet from the road, had threatened the Duke of Aldermere beneath his own roof before half the county. It was not mere insolence. It was ruin of the kind that ends in the street, in the workhouse, in worse. She did not look away. She had promised, long ago, never again to be one of the people who studied their shoes, and she kept the promise now, with her heart slamming and her chin level. The Duke looked at her. She watched the anger go out of him, the way frost melts from a window pane, and behind it, there was no fury at all, but something raw and unbearably tired. His gaze fell to his own gloved right hand, still half raised between them, as though he did not know whose it was. Then it moved past her to the child, shaking against her skirts, and something in that ruined face broke, quietly and completely. He lowered his hand. "The entertainment is ended," he said. Not to any of them, but to the room, in a voice gone flat and strange. Then he turned and walked out through the crowd, which parted before him, and was gone. Lady Hester's face, when Verity dared to look, was white with fury, but 200 people had seen, and whatever Hester wished to do, she could not do it there. "Take it upstairs," she said through her teeth. "Both of you. At once." Verity took Cosima up through the emptying hall into the dark. In the nursery, she built up the fire, washed the small, tear-stained face, put the child to bed with the wooden bird against her cheek, and sat stroking her hair until the ragged breaths slowed into sleep. Then she sat in the cold and waited to be sent away. She did not wait long. Near midnight, the knock came. Mr. Redvers stood in the passage with a candle, his face unreadable. "His Grace," he said, "will see you now." The walk down to the study was the longest of Verity's life, and she had walked some long ones. She followed the candle Redvers carried through passages, where the noise of the departing ball dwindled behind them until there was only the tick of a long case clock and the whisper of her own wet hem on the stone. She had been dismissed from houses before. She knew the shape of it. But this would be worse than any of those, for this time there had been witnesses, and a duke does not forgive an audience. She thought of the child asleep upstairs with the wooden bird against her cheek, and found she was not sorry. She would carry that much, at least, out into the dark with her. The study lay at the cold end of the house, a long room lined with books no one had lately opened, lit by a single branch of candles. The Duke stood at the window with his back to the door, looking out at the fog pressed black against the glass. Redver set down the candle and withdrew, and the door closed with a soft and final sound, and Verity stood upon the worn carpet with her hands folded and waited for the blow to fall. For a long while he did not turn. "You threatened me," he said at last, "in my own house, before the better part of Northumberland. Yes, your grace. You understand what I might do to you for it." "I understand it exactly," Verity said. "I understood it before I opened my mouth." He turned then. In the candlelight, his face was less like stone and more like a man's, older than it had seemed across the ballroom, and very tired. He crossed to the desk and set his right hand flat upon it, the gloved one, deliberately, the way a man lays down a thing he is daring you to remark upon. Verity looked at it. She did not look away, and she did not soften her face into the pity he plainly expected, for she had been raised in a surgeon's house and had learned the anatomy of a ruined hand before she had learned to dance. She saw how the leather sat over the knuckles, the stiffness in the last 2 fingers. She saw it as her father would have seen it, as a problem and not a horror, and something of that must have shown, for the Duke drew the hand back a fraction and studied her with a new and narrower attention. "You did not flinch," he said. "My father was a surgeon," Verity said. "I have seen far worse than a glove." Something moved behind his eyes and was gone. "A surgeon," he said, half to himself. "And where is he now?" "In a country churchyard these 16 years, Verity said. "The family that broke him saw to it the stone was plain." He did not answer that, but she saw him set it aside in his mind, the way a careful man sets aside a thing he means to take up again. "Then tell me why," he said, "and do not flatter me, and do not grovel, for I have had a belly full of both tonight. Tell me why a woman with nothing, in her first hour beneath my roof, would throw it all away for a child she had known the length of a staircase." Verity considered the question honestly, because it deserved honesty. "Because no one else in that room would," she said, "and because I have stood where she was standing." He waited. "When I was 10 years old," she said, before she had quite decided to tell him, "I stood in a bright and crowded room in my good gray dress, while every decent person in it found somewhere else to look. My father had been ruined by people who found it convenient to ruin him, and he was dying of it by inches, and I was a child, alone in the middle of a crowd, and not one soul stepped forward. Not because they were cruel, because to step forward would have cost them something. I made myself a promise in that room, Your Grace. I have kept it badly, and it has already cost me 3 positions, and I expected it to cost me a 4th tonight. But your daughter looked at me across that ballroom the way I once looked at a hall full of people studying their shoes, and I found that I still cannot do it. I cannot look away. That is the sum of my reason. There is nothing cleverer underneath it." He studied her a while in the candlelight, as though she were a page in a language he had once known and half forgotten. "Most people," he said at last, "when they are frightened, turn either cruel or servile. You appear to turn still. It is a rare quality, and an unnerving one, in a servant. I have found it useful," said Verity, "in houses that were neither kind nor safe." "This house," he said, "isn't safe. I will not pretend otherwise. But it need not be unkind to you if we understand one another." "She is afraid of me," he said then. It was not quite a question. "Yes," said Verity, With reason, tonight. Yes. He looked down at the gloved hand upon the desk. She thought the anger might return. Instead, he said, "Very low, so am I. Afraid of her." He gave a short breath with no laughter in it. Is that not an absurd confession from a grown man? He did not seem to expect an answer, and she gave none. There was a fire, he said. 2 winters passed. He spoke to the window rather than to her, in the manner of a man who has not said the words often and does not trust his voice with them. My wife died in it. My daughter very nearly did. I carried the child out. That is all I mean to tell you, and it is more than I have told anyone living. The gloved hand curled slowly closed upon the desk. Since then, I have not been able to remain in a room with her the length of a prayer. She has her mother's eyes. She looks at me, and I am standing again in the smoke with the beams coming down, and I am no use to her. No use at all. My aunt understood that. She stepped into the gap, and she has run this house, and that child, and me, for 2 years, as it has pleased her. I let her. It was easier than feeling anything. I do not tell you this for your sympathy, he added, more harshly. I tell you so that you will understand exactly what you are being asked to stand in front of. Verity said nothing. She had learned that some confessions are not asking to be answered, only to be heard by someone who will not carry them back down the stairs. Tonight, he went on, and now he did turn to her. My aunt set my daughter before Sir Ambrose Ainsley and his sister like a pony led out at a fair, for she means to see me wed to that cold woman in silver before the year is out. My fortune and my child folded up neat beneath her own hand. I have known it for months. I have not lifted a finger. He looked at Verity very directly. And then a governess I had never seen threatened to break the only sound hand I have left, in front of all of them, for the sake of a frightened little girl. And I find, Miss Danforth, that it is the first thing in 2 years to make me feel like a living man. Verity waited, sensing that the true business of the night had not yet been spoken. I'm not going to dismiss you, he said. She had braced so hard against the opposite that for an instant the words would not arrange themselves into sense. I'm going to do the reverse, he said, and you may decide for yourself whether it is a mercy or a cruelty. I am going to give you my daughter, her hours, her lessons, her health, her keeping, all of it, with my authority behind you and set down in writing, so that my aunt cannot overturn a single word of it. Your wage is trebled from this hour. In return, I ask one thing, and it is not a small thing. Stand between that child and this house. Be the wall that I cannot be. I will not insult you with a pretense that I mean to become her father. I do not know whether that man came out of the fire. But I can pay for a wall, and I can arm it, and I would rather it were a wall that has already shown it will not look away. It was a bargain, and not a warmth, and Verity understood, too, that he was offering her the only thing he had left to give, which was money and authority, and none of himself. She found she respected him the more for the plainness of it. A warmer man would have dressed it in a lie. And if I refuse, she asked, then you leave in the morning with a year's wage and a character that will open any door in England, he said. I owe you that much, whatever you choose. But I do not think you will refuse. I do not think you are able, any more than I am able to sit in a nursery. We are each of us bound by the one thing we cannot do. He drew a sheet of paper toward him, uncapped the ink, and took up the pen in his left hand. Verity understood then why so little in that house was ever set down in his own writing. He wrote slowly, the letters large and effortful and almost childish, the gloved right hand lying useless upon the desk beside the laboring left, and he did it without excuse, and without apology, and without once glancing up to see whether she pitied him. She did not. She had watched her father lose the use of 2 fingers and go on setting bones with the rest, and she knew that a man's worth is not kept in his hands. When he had finished, he sanded the ink, folded the sheet once, and held it out to her. "There," he said. "Your authority, in a hand not even my aunt can pretend to misread." She said yes. Of course she said yes. She would have said it for nothing, and they both knew it. And the trebled wage was only his way of pretending the thing a transaction, so that neither of them need name what it truly was. The candles had burned low when she left the study. Lady Hester was waiting in the dark of the passage, quite still against the paneling, and let Verity come almost level before she spoke. "Enjoy his gratitude," she said, very softly. "It is a short season. I buried a duchess in this house. I have outlasted 3 governesses, and a good deal else besides. And I promise you, Miss Danforth, I shall still be walking these passages long after they have swept up whatever remains of you. Sleep lightly." She was gone before Verity could shape an answer, a whisper of plum silk swallowed by the dark. Verity climbed back to the nursery. Cosima slept on, the wooden bird against her cheek, her face for once unguarded. Verity sat down in the chair beside the small bed and drew off her mended gloves, finger by finger, for the first time since York. Then she looked at her own bare hands in the low firelight and let herself feel, only for a moment, how badly they were shaking. She stopped them. She had a wall to build in the morning, and not much time, she suspected, in which to build it. The building of a wall, Verity had learned across the years, was mostly a matter of mortar, laid one dull course at a time, and children were no different from walls in that regard. She did not set out to win Cosima. She set out only to be reliable, which is a rarer thing and a better one, and which a frightened child will trust long before she will trust affection. She began with the light. On her first morning, she went through the nursery and drew back every curtain and tied it, and cracked the window a hand's breadth to let out 2 years of stale grief. And when Cosima watched her from the bed, with suspicion, she did not explain herself. She simply laid out the day as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Wash and dress, and a proper breakfast taken at a table, rather than smuggled up on a tray. Lessons in the morning, while the mind was fresh. Then, whatever the weather, an hour out of doors. The out of doors was the first small battle. Cosima had not been past the terrace in longer than anyone could rightly say. Lady Hester's household had decided the moor was cold and the child delicate, and had kept her within until she grew pale and quick to tears, and precisely as delicate as they had told her she was. Verity looked at the pinched gray little face and disagreed, privately and completely. On the third morning, she put the child into stout boots and a thick coat, and took her out onto the fell in a wind that scoured the fog clean away. And Cosima, who had braced herself to be miserable, forgot to be, and came home with color in her cheeks and burrs on her hem, and slept that night without waking once. The night waking was the second battle, and the one that taught the house to take Verity seriously. Cosima woke screaming most nights from a dream no one had troubled to ask her about. The governesses before her had either scolded the child for it, or, worse, had sat and wept alongside her, which teaches a child only that her terror is large enough to frighten grown people too. Verity did neither. The first night the screaming brought her from her bed, she did not rush in with a candle and a fuss. She came in quietly, sat on the edge of the small bed, took the hot little hand in her cool one, and said, in the flat and certain voice she kept for exactly such moments, "You are awake now. It is over. I am here. The door is shut, and nothing in that dream can follow you out of it. Tell me what you saw, or do not, as you please. Either way, I am not going anywhere." And she did not go anywhere. She sat, night after night, until the shaking eased, and she asked no more than the child offered, and slowly, across a fortnight, the dream came less often. A terror examined by daylight in steady company begins, in time, to lose its teeth. It was on such a night that the household came round to her. Mrs. Verrall, passing in the small hours with a shawl over her nightgown, stopped in the doorway and watched Verity hold the child through the worst of it, without either coddling or scolding, and something in her tired face gave way. In the morning, there was an extra scuttle of coal for the nursery fire that no one had ordered, and the porridge came up less thin, and once, unasked, a small posy of the last brave flowers from the kitchen garden stood upon the schoolroom sill. Verity remarked on none of it. She had learned that a house, like a child, is best won by not appearing to try. She earned the child's whole trust in one particular hour she would remember long afterward. Cosima had fallen on the scullery steps and opened a long graze down her shin, and the maid who found her had set up the usual clucking that frightens a child far worse than the hurt itself, and Cosima had gone white and rigid and silent in the way that worried Verity most. Verity knelt, considered the wound with a surgeon's daughter's calm eye, and talked the whole while in a low, even voice, not about the leg at all, but about the bird, about what its name might be, about whether it favored the window or the fire. She cleaned the graze and bound it neatly while the child was still deciding, and by the time the linen was tied, Cosima had settled upon Captain and had quite forgotten to be afraid. "You are not frightened of blood," Cosima observed, watching her. "No," said Verity. "My father taught me that a wound is only the body asking for help. It is nothing to be feared. It is only a thing to be tended." The child weighed this with great seriousness. "Are people the same?" she asked. Verity paused, the linen still in her hands. "Yes," she said at last. "I rather think they are." She did not know the Duke stood in the passage. He had taken lately to walking that part of the house at odd hours, telling himself it was for the exercise, and he had halted outside the half-open schoolroom door at the sound of his daughter's voice, raised not in terror, but in plain, ordinary curiosity, a sound he had not heard in 2 years. He did not go in. He stood in the shadow with his gloved hand at his side, and listened to a stranger teach his child that a wound was only a thing to be tended, and for a long moment he could not move at all. When at last he went away, he went quietly, and neither of them knew that he had been there. The new order held for a full 3 weeks, and Blackfell, without quite intending to, began to thaw. Cosima laughed once at something the kitchen cat did, and the sound seemed to startle the very walls. Verity met the Duke himself, but rarely, and always by a kind of accident that she came in time to suspect was not entirely accidental. Once, at dusk, she came upon him in the long gallery where he believed himself alone, standing before a covered portrait she had never seen uncovered, his gloved hand hanging at his side. He did not start. "She is teaching the cat to answer to Captain," he said, without turning. "I heard her at it in the yard. Cosima names everything she loves," Verity said. "It is how she keeps hold of it." He was quiet a while. "And what does she call you?" he asked. "Miss Danforth," said Verity. "I have not earned a name yet." "You will," he said, and there was something almost like dry humor in it, the ghost of a man who might once have been good company. "See only that you do not let her call you anything my aunt might turn into a weapon." Then he inclined his head and went on down the gallery, and Verity stood a while before the covered portrait, wondering what face was underneath, and why a man would keep a thing both hidden and near. Twice in those weeks, Lady Hester tried to countermand her. Once she sent down word that the child was to keep to the house, and Verity sent back, with perfect courtesy, the folded sheet in the Duke's own laboring hand, and heard no more of the matter. Once a footman came to say the child was wanted below to be shown to a caller, and Verity answered, pleasantly, that His Grace had put the child's hours in her keeping, and that the caller was welcome to apply to His Grace direct, and the footman withdrew, looking as though he had been handed a lit coal. Each small victory cost her something in a ledger she could not see, and she knew it, and she paid gladly. Then, one gray afternoon, a carriage came up the drive that she did not know. It was black and well sprung, with a crest upon the door, and Mrs. Verrill went to the window, and her face closed like a shutter drawn against a storm. "Sir Ambrose Ainslie," she said, low, almost to herself. "Back so soon as this?" She turned to Verity, and what was in her face now was almost warning, and almost pity. "Keep the child upstairs today, Miss Danforth. Whatever else you may do, keep her well out of sight." The carriage stood at the door a good hour before anyone thought to send for Verity, and she spent that hour turning the nursery into a fortress by the only means available to a woman with no lock worth the name. She banked the fire, drew the curtains against the drive, set Cosima to a puzzle at the little table, and put herself between the child and the door. Whatever had come up, that drive had come for the child, or for her, and she did not mean to be found unready. It was while she was searching the high nursery cupboard for the child's outgrown winter cloak, meaning to have it let down, that her hand closed on the bottle. It had been pushed to the very back of the shelf, behind a leaning stack of unused copybooks, as though someone had meant it to be neither found nor quite thrown away. A squat brown bottle, half full, stoppered with a twist of rag. Verity drew the stopper and smelled it, and went very still. She knew the smell. She had grown up with it in her father's still-room, the sweet, cloying reek of the quieting cordial that lazy nurseries spooned into fractious children to keep them still, and that her father had refused to hold in the house, calling it a slow thief that stole a child's color and appetite and wits and called the theft good behavior. Verity thought of Cosima as she had first seen her by the cold hearth, the pallor, the listlessness the household had been pleased to call delicacy, the terrors that came and went, and the way the child had bloomed within a fortnight, once the nursery routine had quietly changed and the nightly cordial, which Verity had stopped without ever knowing precisely what it was, had simply stopped coming. She had not known. Now she knew. Someone under this roof had been keeping a grieving child dull and docile and conveniently delicate, a spoonful at a time, and had called it care. She let the anger come, then let it go again, for anger was a luxury, and she had a better use for it than rage. A wrong, her father had taught her, once it is known, is only evidence. She corked it carefully, wrapped it in a handkerchief, and put it deep in her pocket. When she turned back to the room, Cosima was watching her over the puzzle with grave gray eyes that saw more than anyone gave them credit for. "Is it something bad?" the child asked. "It is something finished," said Verity. "That is all. Attend to your puzzle." She was still feeling the weight of it in her pocket when the footman came to say that Sir Ambrose Ainslie desired a word with the governess in the small drawing-room. Sir Ambrose was a well-made man of perhaps 40, with a soft, handsome face and the easy warmth of a person who has never once in his life been refused a thing he truly wanted. He stood at the fire when she came in, and turned and smiled at her, as though they were old friends, met by happy chance. "Miss Danforth," he said, "the famous Miss Danforth. Do sit." "I prefer to stand, thank you," said Verity, who had left the child safe with Mrs. Verrill and did not mean to be long. He inclined his head and did not press it. "You have caused a great deal of talk," he said. "A governess who threatens a duke. That sort of thing travels. I confess I came partly to see the marvel for myself." He looked her over, unhurried, and whatever he had pictured, she watched him quietly set it aside. "You are not what I imagined," he said. "You are very calm." "I am at work," said Verity. "Calm is a requirement of it. Then I shall be brief and let you return to it. My sister is to be the next Duchess of Aldermere. It is quite settled, whatever pantomime took place at the ball. Lady Hester and I have seen to the particulars, and it is the particulars that govern the world, Miss Danforth, not gestures in ballrooms. When my sister is mistress here, there will be changes, as there always are. The child will go to an establishment better suited to her delicate constitution, where she may be properly looked after." He gave the word delicate a great tenderness. "And a new duchess will wish to choose her own people. You take my meaning." "I take it," said Verity. "You are a sensible woman, and sensible women land upon their feet. I am placed to see that you land very softly indeed. A generous character, a quiet sum, a recommendation to a warm house in the south, far from these dreadful winds. All that is asked in return is that between now and the wedding you are, let us say, helpful. That you smooth the child's way to her new home rather than roughen it. That you do not encourage his grace in these late eccentricities of his." He smiled and let the silence work, and mistook it, as his kind always did, for wavering. "Come," he said, gentler. "You are not paid enough to be a martyr." "No one is." "You are right that I am not paid to be a martyr," said Verity. "I am paid to keep that child safe and well. And I have lately learned exactly how safe and well she was kept before I came." She thought of the brown bottle in her pocket and did not name it. She meant to spend it where it would do the most good, and this smiling man was not that place. Something cooled in his face. By degrees, the way a room cools when the fire is let die. "I had hoped to do this kindly," he said. "You should understand your position, since you seem so determined to misread it. You are a governess with a threat against a duke to her name, and a father who died a bankrupt and a cheat. There is not a house in England that would take you on my word against you. A duke's whim shields you today. When my sister is Duchess, that whim will have a mistress, and you will have a folded paper and no character and the open road. Do not wager a child's future or your own on the gratitude of a broken man. Gratitude is the shortest-lived of all the passions." He watched her, waiting for the fear he was accustomed to seeing. It did not come. "You have troubled to learn about my father," Verity said. "That is no small trouble to take over a governess you expected to buy inside an afternoon." Sir Ambrose's smile thinned. "I take trouble over obstacles," he said. "It is why I so seldom keep them long." "So I have observed," said Verity. "Obstacles, and healthy children called delicate, and anyone at all who asks an inconvenient question. You are a great remover of difficulties, Sir Ambrose. I wonder that you sleep so well." For a moment the warmth left him entirely, and she saw the thing that lived beneath it. Then he recovered himself and tried the last door. "I should like to see the child before I go," he said, "to reassure my sister as to her health. Have her brought down." "No," said Verity. The single word appeared to surprise him more than anything else she had said. "I beg your pardon. His Grace has placed the child's hours entirely in my keeping, and set it down in his own hand," said Verity. She drew out the folded sheet, though she did not let it leave her fingers. "The child is at her lessons, and will not be brought down to be looked over like a horse at a fair. Not today, and not by you. If you wish to see her, you may apply to his grace." She had a strong sense that his grace was just now the last person Sir Ambrose wished to apply to about anything. He left within the hour. The black carriage went back down the drive into the failing light, and Verity stood at the nursery window and watched it go, the brown bottle a cold weight against her hip. She would take it to the Duke tonight, she decided. She would put it into his sound hand and tell him what it was and what it meant, and watch what a man did on learning what had been fed to his own child, spoonful by spoonful, beneath his roof while he grieved. But she did not take it to him that night, for that was the night Cosima's fever began. The fever came on between 1 hour and the next, the way fevers do in small children, so that the child who had eaten her supper and named 3 new birds was, by midnight, burning and glassy-eyed and unsure where she lay. Verity had nursed fever before. She did not let herself be afraid, or did not let it show, which for a nurse comes to the same useful thing. She stripped away the heavy coverlet the old household would have piled on, opened the window a hand's breadth to the cold, clean dark, bathed the child's wrists and temples with cool water, coaxed small sips between the shivering fits, and watched with the patient attention her father had drilled into her, for the signs that would tell her whether this was an ordinary fever that would burn itself out by dawn or something that wanted a physician. She had sent Mrs. Verrill to rouse the kitchen for hot water and a kept fire, and word had traveled where Verity had not sent it. A little after 1, the door opened, and the Duke stood in it. She had never seen him near the nursery. She understood what it cost him to stand there, from the gray of his face, and the way his gloved hand gripped the frame, as though the floor pitched beneath him. He looked at the small, flushed figure in the bed, and she watched him brace for the sight of a dying child, because the last time he stood over a bed in this house, a fire had been eating the walls. "It is a fever," Verity said, quickly and plainly, cutting clean across whatever was rising in him. "An ordinary one, I am nearly sure, though I shall sit with her through the night to be certain. She is not in danger. Do you hear me, Your Grace? She is hot and wretched, and she will be perfectly cross and perfectly well by tomorrow. Children burn like this, and it frightens the life from us, and it means very little. Come and see how she breathes. That is what tells you. Not the heat. The breath." And because she spoke as her father had spoken to terrified families, with the authority of one who has seen the thing 100 times and been right, he came. He crossed the room he had not been able to enter for 2 years, and he sat down in the chair on the far side of his daughter's bed, stiff and careful, and he watched her breathe. They sat so a long while. The candle burned. Once the child surfaced far enough to be frightened, and it was not Verity she reached for, but, blindly, the large, dim shape of her father, and the Duke went rigid, and then, slowly, as though it might break in his grip, he took his daughter's small, hot hand in his sound one and let her hold it, and said, in a low, rough voice Verity had not heard from him before, "I am here. Go to sleep. I am here." And the child, satisfied by something in it, slept. Somewhere in the small, dead hours, when the breathing had eased and the sharpest edge of Verity's own fear had dulled, she told him. She took the brown bottle from her pocket, where it had ridden all that long day, and set it on the little table in the candlelight, and told him what it was, and where she had found it, and what it meant. She watched him understand it. She watched the grief on his face turn by slow degrees into something colder and older, and she was not sorry to see it, for a father ought to feel that, and a duke who felt it might at last be moved to act. "Who?" he said. His voice was very quiet. "I do not know whose hand held the spoon," said Verity, "but you know as well as I whose economy decided a docile child was cheaper than a happy one, and who has called her delicate to every soul who would listen, and who means now to send her away for that same manufactured delicacy. The Duke sat looking at the bottle a long time. When he spoke again, it was not of the bottle at all. "My wife would have known it in an instant," he said. "She had your kind of steadiness. I have spent 2 years believing that the best of this family burned with her, and that what remained was only me and my aunt, and a child I could not look at." He turned the bottle slowly with one finger. "I have been a coward, Miss Danforth. Not a villain. Only a coward, which in a duke comes to very nearly the same thing. For a duke who does nothing hands the whole of his power to whoever will pick it up." He looked up. "That ends. Whatever else comes of this night, that ends with it." The fever broke a little before dawn, as she had thought it would, in a sudden dew of sweat and a deep, true sleep, and the small forehead under her palm went cool and damp, and she let go a breath she had held since midnight. "She is through it," she said softly. "She will wake hungry and ill-tempered and entirely herself." The relief that crossed the Duke's face was a naked and terrible thing, and he turned from it, from her seeing it, and in the turning he put his gloved hand up to his eyes, and she saw him wince. "It pains you," she said, not asking. She had watched him favor it all night in the cold, under the strain. "It always pains me in the cold," he said. "It is nothing." Verity looked at him across the sleeping child. Then she rose, came round the bed, knelt by his chair, and held out both her bare hands, palm up, the mended gloves long since pocketed. "Let me see it," she said. He went still. "No one sees it," he said. "I am not no one," said Verity. "I am a surgeon's daughter, and your hand has been set wrong and left to stiffen for want of anyone brave enough to look at it, and it need not pain you as it does. Let me see. I will not flinch. You already know that I will not." For a long moment he did not move, and then, slowly, with his left hand, he drew off the black glove. It was a bad hand. The fire had taken it across the back and drawn the last 2 fingers half closed, and the scars had healed tight and shining. It was the hand of a man who had reached into flame and closed it around a child and not let go. Verity took it in both of hers, gently, turned it to the candlelight, and studied it as her father had taught her, without haste and without horror, and the Duke watched her with a look she would not soon forget. The look of a man hearing a sentence he has lived under so long, read out again, and found, after all, to be commutable. "The tightness can be eased," she said at last. "Not undone, but eased. Warm oil, and the fingers worked a little each day, and it will pain you less and serve you more. I will show you how." She looked up and found his face much nearer than she had thought, and the thing that was in it made her own breath go strange. "Thank you," he said. And then, low, as though it were a far greater confession than the hand had been, "My name is Cassian. I find I should like you to use it. In this room, at least." "Verity," she said. Her own name, given back, the plainest thing she had to offer. "Verity," he repeated, as though trying the weight of it. They were very close. The child slept between their concerns and beyond them. It would have been the easiest thing in the world, and the most foolish, and for one suspended moment it hung there, wanted and unmade. Then Verity, because one of them had to be sensible and she had the longer practice, drew back a little, kept his ruined hand folded in her steady ones, and did not let it go. And that, for tonight, was the greater thing. Dawn came gray and ordinary to the window, and with it, from far below, the sound of a carriage on the drive, and then a second, and Verity felt the world come back into the room like a draft beneath a door. Mrs. Verrill appeared at the door, her face pale above her candle. "Beg pardon, Your Grace," she said, "but Lady Hester has people coming. She has asked half the county for this afternoon, and she is telling them all that you are to announce your betrothal to Miss Ainsley before dinner. She has had papers brought from the attorney and laid on your study desk for signing." She swallowed. "She set it all in motion, sir. The very moment she heard the child was took ill in the night, as though she thought it a convenient time." The Duke rose. He drew the black glove back over the eased and aching hand, but slowly now, and differently, the way a man takes up a tool rather than hides a shame. "Then we had best go down," he said, "and meet my aunt's convenient afternoon." He looked at Verity. "Both of us." The drawing room at Blackfell had not held so many people since the night of the ball, and Lady Hester had arranged them all, with the care of a general placing troops, before a battle she has already, in her own mind, won. She stood at the center of it in gray silk and her best diamonds, with the look of a woman who has waited a long while for a particular afternoon and means to savor every minute of it. Miss Ainsley sat near her, pale and composed, already wearing the small proprietary smile of a future duchess, surveying rooms that will shortly be hers to redecorate. Sir Ambrose stood at the window with a glass of the Duke's own wine. The attorney's clerk hovered by the study door with a leather folder held to his chest, and much of the neighborhood sat waiting, dressed for an announcement, murmuring pleasantly to one another about the romance of it. A widowed Duke consoled at last. When the Duke came in, with Verity a single pace behind him, the murmuring stopped. Verity had learned to read a room as her father read a patient, at a glance, from the surface signs. This one was pleased with itself, warm and certain, come to watch a kindness done to a sad man and be home in time for dinner. It did not yet know what it had truly been gathered to see. She almost pitied it. "Ah," said Lady Hester into the silence, with a smile that did not quite cover her surprise at the governess at his heel. "Nephew, we had almost given you up." She went to him, all warmth for the benefit of the audience, and dropped her voice for him alone, though Verity stood near enough to hear every word. "You look dreadful," she murmured. "Sign the papers. Say the few words that are wanted, and you may go straight back up to your grief, and I shall manage all the rest, as I have always managed it. Everything is ready on the desk. Miss Ainsley has been more than patient." The Duke did not drop his voice at all. "What is on the desk?" he said. Hester's smile stiffened by a single degree. "The marriage settlement," she said, brightly, "for the room. And the arrangement for dear Cosima, the school at Harrogate we spoke of, for delicate children, where she will be so much better cared for than she can ever be in this drafty old house." She patted his sleeve. "All quite in order. You need only put your name to it." "I spoke of nothing," said the Duke, "and I shall put my name to nothing." A small laugh from Hester for the audience. "Come," she said. "You are overtired. The child gave us all such a fright, being taken ill in the night. Poor delicate creature." "She is not delicate," said the Duke. The words fell into the room quite quietly, and yet every soul in it heard them. "She is not delicate," he said again. "She is a strong and healthy child of 7 years, and she has been made to seem otherwise, deliberately, under my own roof, and I have this night discovered how." He put out his sound hand without looking, and Verity laid the brown bottle into it, and he held it up, so the pale afternoon light came through it, thick and brown. "Does anyone here know what this is?" he asked the room. My governess knew it the instant she found it at the back of a nursery cupboard, because she is a surgeon's daughter, and was raised to tell a healing draught from a harmful one. It is a soothing cordial, sweetened to hide what it truly is, the sort of thing that is fed by the spoonful to an inconvenient child, to keep her pale and sleepy and quiet and delicate. He turned to his aunt, and his voice did not rise, which was somehow far worse than if it had. My daughter has been dosed with this, aunt, for the better part of 2 years. On whose order? Lady Hester had gone white, but she was not a woman to fall at the first blow. This is absurd, she said. A servant's tale. That creature would say anything to keep her place. She found the bottle. No doubt she brought the bottle herself. You would take the word of a hired governess with a grudge over the word of your own blood. I would take the word of Mrs. Verrall, said the Duke, who tells me the cordial was ordered from the apothecary in your name, and entered in the household book in your own hand, these 2 years past. And I would take the word of Redverse. The old butler stepped forward from beside the door, where he had stood so long and so quietly that half the room had forgotten he was a man and not a fixture. He held a plain ledger in both hands. I have kept the true accounts of this house in a drawer her ladyship did not know of, Redverse said, to the room in the flat and steady voice of a man who has waited long enough for leave to speak, and does not mean to waste it, because I did not trust the accounts she had me keep for the showing. His Grace has seen them this morning. The money set down for the care of a delicate child have not gone to her care. They have gone to settle certain debts of her ladyship's, and to purchase, in some part, the goodwill of certain guests presently in this room. He did not look at Sir Ambrose. He did not need to. A sound went through the seated rows then, not quite a gasp, more the small collective shift of a great many respectable people discovering all at once that they are seated in the wrong pew at the wrong wedding. Verity saw fans come down. She saw a dowager in the front row lean and murmur behind her glove to her neighbor, and she understood that the story which walked out of this room would not be the one Lady Hester had written for it. The Duke set the bottle down upon the mantel, where every person in the room could see it. "I have been asleep, Aunt," he said. "You saw to that, too, in your way. It was easier for you if I slept. But I am awake now, and I find that a great many things which were permitted to happen while I slept are going to be undone, beginning this afternoon, before the very audience you were so good as to gather." Sir Ambrose set down his glass with enormous care. "Whatever the truth of these domestic matters," he began, "my sister's honor cannot be attached to a household in such evident disarray." "Your sister's honor," said the Duke, "was to be attached to my fortune, which my aunt had promised to deliver up into your family's keeping, along with my name and my child. There is no fortune on offer, Sir Ambrose. There was never anything on offer past my signature, and my signature is not to be had today, nor next month, nor ever, by you. I imagine you will wish to be gone before the roads worsen." For a moment, Sir Ambrose looked as though he might say something further. Then he looked at the faces of the assembled county and at the brown bottle upon the mantel, and he understood, as Verity had understood, the moment the Duke began to speak, that there is no ruin so complete as the one performed in front of the very people one has gathered to be dazzled. He collected his sister with a glance, and the two of them went out without another word, and the small proprietary smile had gone entirely from Miss Ainsley's face. Lady Hester stood alone in the center of the room she had arranged so carefully, and looked about her at the rows of gilt chairs and the faces above them, and Verity watched her understand that the audience she had summoned as her instrument had become the instrument of her undoing. "You will regret this," Hester said at last, low and shaking, all the pleasantness gone out of her. "That child will ruin you as her mother very nearly did, and this creature will rob you blind and break your heart, and you will remember, alone in this cold house, that I told you so. You are not staying to see it, said the Duke. You have a house in Bath that my late uncle was fool enough to leave you. You will go to it within the hour. Redvers will have your boxes brought down. You will not see my daughter again. Lady Hester swept toward the door, and as she passed Verity she paused, and the two women looked at one another in the crowded, silent room. I told you I should still be walking these passages, Hester said, very softly, long after they had swept up whatever remained of you. You were mistaken only in which of us there would be anything left to sweep, said Verity. She did not say it in triumph. She said it the way she said most true things, plainly, and once. Hester's face worked, and then she was gone. And a moment later, the great front door closed upon her, and the sound of it went through the old house like something long strained, settling at last into its proper place. The county filed out not long after, robbed of the announcement they had dressed for, and richly repaid, with a far better story to carry home. By evening, Blackfell was quiet and lighter, the way a house is lighter when a weight has gone out of it that everyone had long since stopped noticing they carried. That night, the Duke sent for Verity, and she went down to the study where it had all begun some weeks before, and found him at the same cold window. And she understood that the arrangement they had struck that first night, the wall, the wage, the bargain with no warmth in it, was about to be spoken of again and altered, and that she did not in the least know how she wished it to end. The study was warm for once. Someone had built the fire high, and the branch of candles had been replaced with fresh ones, and the room that had been so bitter on the night of the ball looked, in the kinder light, merely like a place where a tired man read too little and thought too much. Verity had told herself, coming down the stairs, that she knew what this was. He would thank her, handsomely and coldly, for the service she had done his house. He would settle a sum upon her and the child, and offer her a permanence that was really only a longer leash, and she would take it, because it was more than she had ever been offered, and because the child was worth it. She had made her peace with all of that on the stairs. She was entirely unprepared for anything else. He did not turn from the window when she came in, and for a moment she feared they would play the whole scene again exactly as before, and found she could not have borne it if they had. I have been trying, he said, to compose a speech. I have been at it an hour. It was to be very handsome. He turned. I find I cannot recall a word of it, which is likely just as well, for you have a great dislike of handsome things, Miss Danforth, and would have seen straight through it. I have a dislike of untrue things, said Verity. Handsome and true are only rarely the same. He was quiet a moment. You saved my daughter tonight, he said. Not the fever. That would have broken on its own. I mean, all the rest of it. The bottle, the room downstairs, my aunt. You came into this house some weeks ago with one trunk and a threat, and you have taken it apart and set it back together the right way round, while I stood by and watched you do the thing I was too great a coward to do myself. I owe you a great deal more than I am able to pay. And Verity, watching him, understood that he had begun, as she had feared he would, in the language of debts. She waited, quite still, to hear what the payment would be. He came to the desk and took up, out of long habit, a clean sheet of paper, as though he would write her some new arrangement, some grander post, some permanent wage. He looked down at it. Then he set the pen down again, deliberately, and pushed the paper away. And Verity understood that he had caught himself reaching for the only language he trusted, the language of terms and settlements, and had chosen, with real difficulty, to speak the other kind instead. I could offer you a great deal, he said. A housekeeper's place, a companion's place, any position you cared to name, at any wage you cared to set. I could bind you to Cosima with papers so thick that even my aunt could not have prized you loose. That is the thing I know how to do. I know how to pay for what I am afraid to ask for." He stopped. "It is a coward's habit, and you have cured me of a great many of those this month. So I shall try, now, to ask." He drew off the black glove. He did it without ceremony, and held the ruined hand out to her across the desk, palm up in the candlelight, the scars and the half-closed fingers, and all of it, the hand that no one saw, offered plainly to the one person who had already seen it and had not looked away. "I have nothing to give you that you have not already seen at its very worst," he said. "This hand, this cold house, a daughter far more yours than mine, and always will be, and a man who slept through 2 years of his own life, and woke only because a stranger threatened him in his own ballroom. It is a poor bargain, Verity. There is no warmth in it that you did not put there yourself." He looked at her steadily. "Stay anyway. Not as her wall, as my wife. I am asking you. I have not asked a soul for anything in 2 years. I am asking you now." And Verity, who had spent her whole life being useful to people who would not have crossed a room for her, who had made herself into stone precisely because stone cannot be disappointed, stood looking at the offered hand and found that the thing she felt was not joy, or not only joy, but fear. The plain animal fear of a woman who has been safe only so long as she wanted nothing. "You should know what you are asking," she said, and her own voice was not entirely steady. "I do not know how to be chosen. I know only how to be needed. They are not the same thing. I have lived my whole life upon the second, because the first was never once offered me, and I am 6 and 20, and set in all my ways, and I may be very bad at it. Then we shall both be very bad at it together," he said. "I am worse. I have 2 years head start on you, and a ruined hand, and a wife I have not finished grieving, and perhaps never shall." He did not lower the hand. "I am not offering you a mended man, Verity. I am offering you a true one. It is all I have, and it is yours if you will take it." She took the hand. She took it in both of hers, the ruined right hand, warm now in the firelight, and held it as she had held it over the sleeping child. And this time, when he drew her gently in, she did not draw back and be sensible, because she had been sensible for 16 years, and it had kept her safe from precisely nothing that mattered. For a moment, neither of them moved, 2 people long practiced in going without, unlearning it. Then he lifted the ruined hand and touched her face with it, carefully, as though making certain she was real and warm and there. And she let him, and did not flinch, and that was its own kind of vow. He kissed her once, carefully, the way a man kisses a thing he has decided to spend the rest of his life being careful of, and she found that she wasn't made of stone after all, and perhaps never had been, but only cold for want of anyone willing to sit near enough to warm her. When they drew apart, the fire had burned low, and neither of them had marked it. "There is a child asleep upstairs," Verity said at last, into his shoulder, "who will have a very great deal to say about all this in the morning, and who will insist upon naming it." "Let her," said the Duke. "She names everything she means to keep." Spring came late to the moors, as it always did, and then all at once, so that one gray week the fells were brown and dead, and the next they were greening. The beck running high and loud with snowmelt, the wind off the tops gone soft and smelling of growing things. Blackfell Hall thawed with the year, and did not freeze again. Redvers unbent by perhaps half a degree, which in Redvers was very nearly dancing, and took to leaving the great doors open on fine days to let the moor air walk through the hall. Mrs. Verrall, who had warned Verity on that first strange night to keep the child well out of sight, now could not be kept from showing her off and had a great many opinions, freely given, on the proper raising of small duchesses. They were married in the spring, quietly, in the small church down in the valley, and afterward, the whole household and half the tenantry came back up to the hall, and for the second time since Verity had first seen it, the great rooms stood full of people and blazing with light. She stood at the head of the long room in a gown that wasn't gray and looked out over the crowd and thought of another bright and crowded room, a long time ago and far to the south. There had been a small girl once, in a room much like this one, in a good gray dress, who stood quite alone while every person of consequence found somewhere else to look. Verity had promised that girl, across all the years between, that she would never be one of the people who studied their shoes. She had not understood, in the making of it, that she made the promise as much for the frightened child she herself had been, as for any child she might one day come to stand beside. Across the room, Cosima Vane climbed up onto a chair. She was 8 now, and brown from the moor, and not in the least delicate, and she had appointed herself mistress of the ceremonies, without troubling to consult a living soul. She stood upon the chair with the little wooden bird in her fist, and announced, in a voice with no fear anywhere in it, that she wished to say something, and the bright, crowded room, which 2 winters before had frozen a weeping child into silence, and then turned from her, turned now, as one person, toward the small girl on the chair. Not a single soul in it studied their shoes. They looked at her and waited for her, warmly, the whole glittering roomful of them. And Cosima, who had once been unable to make a curtsy before these very people, informed them at great and confident length that her father had married the best person in the whole world, that she had chosen the person very largely herself, and that the person's name was Verity, which she had lately decided meant true, and that she would thank them all to remember it. The room laughed and applauded and went on looking and did not turn away. And Verity, watching a child hold a bright room in the palm of her small hand, felt the old wound in her own chest close over at last, quietly, the way a thing heals once it has finally been tended. The Duke came to stand beside her. He had long since given up the glove indoors. The ruined hand, eased now by warm oil and daily working, and no longer carried like a thing to be ashamed of, hung open at his side, and when she slipped her bare fingers into it, he closed them round hers, without a thought for who might see. "There was a letter for you this morning," he said, low, beneath the noise of the room, "from the town where your father once practiced. It seems certain old accounts have been reopened and re-examined, certain slanders quietly withdrawn, and a plain stone in a country churchyard is to be replaced with a better one that says what he truly was, a surgeon of skill and of honor." He looked at her. "I told you, that first night, that I had set the matter aside to take up again. I have taken it up. It is done." For a moment, Verity could not trust herself to speak at all. The shrouded canvas that had hung 2 long years in the dark of the long gallery now hung uncovered above the great fireplace, a laughing, dark-eyed woman brought back into the light. A house that has learned to look its griefs in the face has no more need to hide them. And besides, Cosima had asked, quite reasonably, why she alone should be forbidden the sight of her own mother, and no one had been able to give her a reason worth the name. She visited the portrait each day, and told it the news of the household, and had given it a name, as she named all the things she loved and meant to keep, though what the name was, she confided to no one but the painted face. The last of the daylight came slanting through the high windows, and lay gold across the floor where the county had once stood in silence, and Verity Vane, who had come to this house a governess with mended gloves and one small trunk and a promise she had kept at the cost of very nearly everything, stood in a bright and crowded room and was seen, and for the first time in her life was entirely unafraid of being looked at in return.